seconds later, the shock front arrives.
21 banned documentaries, 7 levels. I've put together some of the most disturbing films ever censored by the government. We'll start with documentaries that exposed uncomfortable truths, then go deeper into real-world footage so dangerous that the most powerful regimes fought to keep it from the world. Level 1. De Niro's Gamble. In 2016, Robert De Niro put his reputation on the line for Vaxxed, From Cover-Up to Catastrophe, one of the most controversial documentaries of the decade. As a co-founder of the prestigious Tribeca Film Festival, his backing would usually give the project instant credibility. However, his decision sparked instant backlash, not least because the documentary was directed by Andrew Wakefield. Years earlier, Wakefield's study had claimed there was a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. His audacious claims had sparked one of the biggest public health controversies in modern history.
These parents were not anti-vaccine. They'd taken their children along to be vaccinated. They were like you and me. They were highly articulate, professional individuals, many of them, who had merely followed the rules, but had observed these dramatic changes in their children.
However, that study was eventually retracted. Wakefield lost his medical license after extensive scientific research found no credible evidence supporting his claims. Now, despite this, the documentary Vaxxed still argued that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had concealed evidence supporting the claim. Instead of distancing himself from the film, Tribeca selected it for its official lineup, giving the documentary the attention it could never have achieved on its own. Well, as soon as the announcement became public, critics and public health experts called on the festival to remove it. They argued that screening the documentary at such a prestigious event could legitimize claims that had already been widely discredited. As the father of an autistic child, De Niro initially defended the film, saying he believed it raised questions worth discussing. But as the criticism continued to grow, it became harder to stick to his defense. Only days after standing behind the film, De Niro announced that Vaxxed had been removed from the festival altogether.
I felt that this was something that people should at least see. And there was a strong reaction from people who I didn't expect to have such a strong reaction, the way I've been told. But I felt that, we all felt that, I don't want to get the festival in some kind of controversy that would be a misperception about it. So I said, let's just pull it. It got attention, oddly enough.
For most documentaries, losing a premiere at Tribeca would have ended their momentum. But Vaxxed followed the opposite path. People immediately believed that the removal proved powerful institutions were trying to silence the film. As that narrative spread, Vaxxed reached an even larger audience despite its censorship. Dual Empire. When Jean Roche released Les Maîtres Fous, he did something almost impossible. He got European colonizers and African freedom fighters on the same page. In 1955, Roche was granted rare permission to film the secret Hoka ceremony near Accra. The movement was largely composed of migrant workers. During the week, they worked as dock workers, laborers, and traders. But on the weekend, they gathered outside the city for ceremonies hidden from public life. It was during these ceremonies that Roche captured the footage that would spark decades of controversy. As one of the rituals began, participants entered trance states and slowly took on the identities of colonial governors. They saluted invisible commanders, barked military orders, and reenacted the same hierarchy that ruled over their everyday lives.
Et le troisième possédé se lève, c'est Capitaine Malia, le capitaine de la mer Rouge, qui marche en faisant le slow march, la marche de parade de l'armée britannique.
As the ceremony intensified, animal sacrifices followed, highlighting an unexpected contrast. Rouge filmed all of this, believing it was a harmless depiction of African workers navigating life under colonial rule. But shortly after the documentary's release, French colonial authorities banned Les Maîtres Fous in Niger. Before long, British authorities prohibited it in the Gold Coast and several other colonial territories. Officials believe the film crossed a dangerous line because it showed Africans embodying the governors, commanders, and administrators who ruled over them. So it was received as a direct challenge to their authority. As news of the film spread, criticism also came from an unexpected direction. Many African writers, filmmakers, and intellectuals also publicly rejected the documentary. Their objection, however, had nothing to do with the colonial authority. They argued that Rouge had reduced African spirituality to shocking imagery while offering very little cultural context. Now, ironically, all attempts to suppress the documentary only made it more influential. Just 2 years after its release, it won the Grand Prix for ethnographic film at the Venice Biennial. Hidden Handler. Most documentaries get censored after they're released, but The Red Chapel never even made it that far. In 2009, Danish filmmaker Mads Brügger decided to do something only a few have ever managed to do. He was going to document North Korea in its raw state, exactly as it was. To make his plan work, he knew he had to get full government permission, but he also knew he wouldn't get it by presenting the project as an investigative documentary. So he claimed to be a filmmaker leading a harmless theater group visiting the country on a cultural exchange. To further sell the deception, Brügger decided to travel with 2 Danish-Korean comedians. Well, his plan worked.
2 adopted Danish-Korean comedians returning for the first time to Korea, but choosing the north instead of the south. Jacob, as a handicapped person, could also be of good use to them. For a long time it has been claimed that handicapped persons in North Korea are either killed at birth or shipped off to camps for non-desired citizens, where they soon will die.
The heritage of his teammates was appealing to North Korean officials, and the group was welcomed into the country. Their stay, however, came with a hidden price. From the moment they arrived, an official government handler accompanied them everywhere. She decided where they could go, who they could meet, and what they were allowed to film. Even their cameras never truly belonged to them. Every recording had to be handed over to the government for approval. As the days passed, the control only got worse. Government officials started rewriting their scenes and removing ideas that wouldn't paint the country in a good light. Before long, the filmmakers realized they were no longer creating their own documentary. They were now helping North Korea create a propaganda version instead.
I'm very happy when you have the portrait page of our president. We have his portrait page near to our heart, you see?
As if that weren't enough, the group was then presented on state-run TV as friendly foreign visitors who deeply admired the country. Mads Brügger had entered the country hoping to expose the regime's propaganda machine. Instead, he was now being used as a major piece of state propaganda. Now, once the trip was over, Brügger returned home with footage that unfortunately did not tell the real story. However, he made sure his film highlighted the extraordinary lengths the government officials had gone to in order to control every stage of the production. Even though The Red Chapel could never circulate freely inside North Korea, it established Mads Brügger as one of filmmaking's most provocative and fearless voices. Level 2. The Effigy. One critic in Moscow hated a documentary so much that he wanted the director dead. The Soviet Story, directed by Latvian filmmaker Edvin Šnorr, wasn't just another history documentary about Soviet war crimes. Those were already well documented. Instead, this one wanted to do something far more dangerous. It argued that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany shared deeply political and ideological connections, directly linking Stalin's regime to Hitler's atrocities. That single comparison suddenly triggered an international political crisis. The documentary tied together famine, state repression, and the Soviet labor camp system into one powerful and impossible to ignore accusation. But its most controversial revelation was the claim that Russia's secret police were working with the German Gestapo during the war. This destroyed the modern Kremlin narrative that the USSR was purely Europe's liberator.
The Nazi SS and the Soviet NKVD, the Stalin security police, cooperated very closely.
Now, before the film even reached wide distribution, pro-Russian politicians condemned it as blatant propaganda. But when it premiered inside the walls of the European Parliament, the outrage in Moscow boiled over. Youth groups organized massive protests outside the Latvian embassy in Moscow, burning an effigy of Schnorr under banners. They publicly, loudly accused the filmmaker of rewriting history. Now, shortly after, a prominent pro-Kremlin political analyst declared that watching the documentary made him want to kill the director and burn the embassy to the ground. This threat, however, was thankfully never followed through on. Locked away. Long before he starred in hit movies like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Lenny McLean was Britain's most feared bare-knuckle fighter. And a banned 1996 documentary captured his violent world on camera. Bare Fist, the sport that wouldn't die, took viewers straight into Britain's underground fight scene. This was a brutal, unlicensed world where men fought without gloves in front of secret crowds. The filmmakers were actually trying to make a serious case for recognizing and legalizing bare-knuckle boxing as a legitimate combat sport. To prove their point, they brought in real-life fighters like Lenny McLean and filmed actual, unedited underground matches.
My name is Lenny McLean. I'm a bare-knuckle fighter. I was for 20 years known as the hardest man in Britain. I went all around the country fighting the toughest in the country for money. I was the best in my time.
In December 1996, the team submitted the completed documentary to the British Board of Film Classification, the BBFC, to secure an official certificate for home video distribution. But while the censors didn't object to the idea of discussing bare-knuckle fighting, they panicked at how the film presented it. The documentary featured graphic, extended footage of real-life brawls, violence, and all. The BBFC believed the film's graphic violence made the outlaw lifestyle look cool, exciting, and heroic. Even worse, officials claimed the film was dangerously instructional. They pointed out specific, raw fight details that viewers could easily copy in street fights. The board gave the filmmakers a choice: make heavy cuts to remove the long fight sequences, or face a total ban.
I've come a long way since growing up here in London's East End. Personally, I hate violence. I'm not a violent man. I was brought up in violence. So to survive, I had to go that route.
But the filmmakers were caught in a trap. Removing the raw fight footage would undermine the documentary's point, so they refused the cuts. On September 4th, 1996, the BBFC officially refused the film a certificate. However, in the UK, a video without a BBFC classification cannot legally be sold or rented in stores. The decision effectively wiped the film off store shelves nationwide. The filmmakers tried again 3 years later in June of 1999, resubmitting the documentary in hopes the board had softened its stance, but the censors refused it again for the same reasons. To this day, underground bare-knuckle fighting continues behind closed doors. The film, meanwhile, has never been released. Toxic Air. When Under the Dome premiered in 2015, it hit 150 million views in less than a week. But just 7 days later, the Chinese government would do everything in its power to scrub it off the internet entirely. Former state television journalist Chai Jing had built the film specifically to expose the Chinese government.
以前我从来没有对污染感到过害怕，去哪儿我都没戴过口罩。那场雾霾持续了差不多2个月，它让我意识到这件事情不是偶然发生，也不可能很快过去了。
However, at the time, the government had no issues with the movie. In fact, they even helped promote it. At the beginning of the documentary, it looked like the government had found its biggest ally. But as those views climbed into the tens of millions, government officials changed their tune. They suddenly realized the film was not supporting them, but pointing fingers back at them. The documentary traced toxic air directly back to massive state-owned energy companies, coal plants, and powerful steel producers. All of them were operating with weak regulations and zero oversight.
监管部门都不想去触及这一块，管得了吗？能取缔得了吗？
可能管不了。
你开玩笑，河北的钢铁企业是到什么程度？已经到了你取缔不了的程度。
To fuel things further, she actively urged ordinary people to report illegal polluters, demand enforcement, and hold local officials accountable. Essentially, to fight back against their own government. Almost immediately, social media exploded with citizens demanding real corporate accountability. State authorities immediately panicked. Within 7 days of the premiere, the Chinese Communist Party's publicity department issued a strict gag order. Major video platforms were ordered to delete the documentary immediately, while news outlets were instructed to wipe every trace of coverage.
Oh, I think it's a classic example of the Chinese knowing that there is an issue here, but when you reveal too much, that's when it becomes a problem. Look, this is a very emotionally charged documentary.
In just 7 days, a documentary the government had helped promote became one it wanted erased. Although copies continued to circulate outside official channels, Under the Dome disappeared from China's mainstream internet almost overnight. What? The Chinese government repressing stuff that makes it look even a little bit bad? I'm shocked. Level 3. All for Truth. In 1993, the Panama Deception achieved every documentary filmmaker's ultimate dream. It won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature.
And the Oscar for Best Achievement in Documentary Features goes to The Panama Deception, Barbara Trent and David Casper producing.
Yet despite holding Hollywood's highest honor, it still couldn't secure a national television broadcast. The documentary challenged the official U.S. narrative surrounding the 1989 invasion of Panama. At the time, President George H.W. Bush pushed Operation Just Cause as a noble military mission to protect American lives and remove dictator Manuel Noriega.
Last night, I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama. No president takes such action lightly. This morning, I want to tell you what I did and why I did it.
However, the documentary painted a completely different picture. Instead of celebrating Noriega's capture, the filmmakers alleged that Washington's interest was driven in part by U.S. strategic interests, including control of the Panama Canal. To build that devastating case, the production team spent 2 years gathering unseen footage and eyewitness testimony. The result was an unflinching and frank challenge to the U.S. narrative. But that bold challenge brought immediate retaliation, and the government of Panama banned the film outright for portraying the U.S. intervention as a destructive act of force. Despite the prestige of its Oscar win, PBS refused to air The Panama Deception nationwide. Instead, they left it to local stations to decide whether they were brave enough to show it. The irony was impossible to ignore. Hollywood had just named it the year's best documentary, yet America's largest public television network wouldn't give it a nationwide audience. As a direct result of the ban, international audiences and independent theaters rushed to screen it, viewing the censorship itself as proof that the documentary had exposed a major truth the government wanted no one to know. The Loyalist. North Korea prides itself on having one of the most ruthless intelligence networks on the planet. But a Danish chef would expose a critical blind spot in their system. Ulrik Larsen's journey into North Korea's secretive world began after he watched The Red Chapel, the same documentary directed by Danish filmmaker Mads Brügger. After seeing how tightly the regime controlled information, Larsen became fascinated by the idea of seeing behind that wall himself. Well, that curiosity eventually led him to contact Brügger, who was also searching for people with the same curiosity. Knowing that entering as a regular journalist would get him arrested immediately, Larsen searched for a back door into the regime. Well, that search led him directly to the Korean Friendship Association, a global network of foreign fan clubs dedicated to spreading propaganda for North Korea. All he had to do was fit right in.
Everywhere he went in North Korea, the mole was filming. Of course, he also brought his camera when he was awarded a medal, recognizing his work for the regime.
To build credibility, he attended every meeting, printed propaganda posters, and repeated every lie the government wanted the world to hear. For 10 years, Larsen played the part of a devoted loyalist. Because of that absolute commitment, he earned their trust. Soon, regime insiders brought him into their private inner circle where real state security operations were discussed. But as Larsen sat in those rooms listening to officials outline the illegal deals, he realized he was just an untrained civilian surrounded by dangerous men, and if he wanted to actually expose them, he'd need help. Driven by that realization, Ulrik and Mads Brügger recruited a former French foreign legionnaire. His role was to disguise himself as a ruthless international investor.
I forgot to mention, there is another person involved in this. That person is Mr. James. His real name is Jim, and he was chosen by me to perform the role as Mr. James.
Under Brügger's direction, the Legionnaire assumed the fake identity of Mr. James, a multi-millionaire looking for off-the-books business opportunities. The moment Mr. James dangled millions of dollars, the North Korean operatives dropped their caution entirely. Suddenly, they began laying out plans to bypass United Nations sanctions illegally. Shortly after that, the operation crossed into more terrifying territory. During a private meeting, the contacts pulled out a secret sales catalog of heavy military hardware and offered it for sale to Mr. James. This was in direct violation of international law, and Ulrik and Mr. James captured every second on hidden cameras.
At this point, you're in a secret underground lair in North Korea, facilitating the signature of a weapons contract. What is going through your head at this stage?
Those secret recordings made it into the 2020 documentary, The Mole, and the footage immediately triggered an explosive international crisis. Faced with undeniable video evidence, the North Korean regime went into full damage control. They issued furious denials throughout their embassies, branding the entire film as fake, fabricated propaganda hit piece designed to slander their leadership. Because North Korea strictly censors all foreign media, The Mole was banned nationwide. As for Ulrik Larsen, 10 years of playing a loyalist made his life extremely difficult. Today, he lives under constant police protection, knowing he exposed one of the most ruthless regimes on Earth. 7 months inside. Russian-Canadian filmmaker Anastasia Trofimova set out to film a simple war documentary. She would end up creating one of the most hated movies of 2024. Her documentary, Russians at War, delivered something almost no camera crew had ever achieved: a full 7 months with a Russian battalion fighting in Ukraine. Instead of highlighting grand military tactics or battlefield spectacles, Trofimova turned her lens on the soldiers themselves. She tracked their daily routines, recorded their private conversations, and captured their growing fears and frustrations as the war dragged on.
Патриотизм существует, но мне нужно себя, даже вот когда я дерусь в драке, мне всегда нужно знать, что я прав. Если я не прав, я не лезу в драку. Так и здесь. Мы полезли в драку на Украину. Я себя не чувствую правым.
On camera, the soldiers appeared exhausted, terrified, and deeply conflicted. While some openly admitted they had no idea why they were fighting, others simply parroted familiar Kremlin propaganda about Ukraine and the West. For Trofimova, the film was an attempt to show the tragic human cost of war from the inside out. But to Ukrainian critics, it felt like a dangerous betrayal.
My nephew was killed by Russians. We don't need to understand the killer's feelings. We don't need to see this movie to know it is propaganda.
They argued that by focusing so heavily on the soldiers' emotional struggles, Trofimova glossed over the massive destruction, atrocities, and war crimes they were committing. After debuting at the Venice Film Festival, activists took to the streets demanding the film be pulled. And especially if you happen to be Ukrainian or Russian, I'd kind of love to hear what you have to say about it in the comments, because I do not feel qualified to speak on this. The pressure was so intense that TVO, the Canadian public broadcaster that helped fund the project, officially pulled its support. TIFF also abruptly suspended all scheduled screenings, citing severe threats to public safety and festival operations. Although they eventually restored a limited run days later, the damage was already done.
War is a tragedy, and this was our tragedy, and this was a piece of the puzzle of this war, filmed from the Russian side. And I thought it was very important for people to see.
Without a single government banning it, the public backlash turned Russians at war into the most fiercely contested documentary. Now, up to this point, we've covered documentaries that exposed some controversial truths, but these next ones had entire governments hitting the panic button. So subscribe and buckle up. Level 4. Digital Reports. When the BBC aired India, the Modi Question in early 2023, it wasn't scheduled to broadcast on Indian television, and for a clear reason. The series examined Prime Minister Narendra Modi's political career and his complicated relationship with India's Muslim minority. The film focused heavily on the 2002 Gujarat riots that left over 1,000 people dead. What officials didn't expect was that this historical documentary would evolve into an immediate national crisis.
One of the worst acts of religious hatred India's ever seen. In some areas, the grief and anger here have already erupted into violence. That's alarming news in a state where racial hatred is deeply ingrained.
The series unearthed a previously unreleased British government report from 2002 accusing top state officials of enabling the violence. Labeling the documentary anti-India garbage with a colonial mindset, the state invoked emergency digital laws. The government ordered YouTube, Twitter, and web platforms to wipe every trace of it from the internet overnight. They thought deleting those links would bury the film, but of course it did the opposite. Driven by pure curiosity, university students across India began downloading the forbidden files from encrypted apps and organizing secret campus screenings. When authorities caught wind of what was happening, the situation escalated fast. As millions kept bypassing the blocks, the government's focus shifted from the students to a much bigger target. Telegram channels and VPNs continued to circulate the film across the country. Just weeks after the censorship battle began, dozens of income tax officials marched into the BBC's main headquarters in India. Officers locked down the buildings for 3 straight days, seizing journalists' personal phones, scanning hard drives, and questioning senior editorial staff overnight. Government spokespersons claimed it was a routine survey into diverted foreign profits, but the international press called it a direct political retaliation against a foreign broadcaster.
There seems to me to be a state in turmoil. We're seeing repeated violence. We're seeing people living in fear.
I'm not agree with your information. They have no right to talk about the internal matter of any government. We know what the human rights are. You Britishers should not preach us human rights.
By trying to scrub the documentary off the internet, officials accidentally turned it into one of the biggest free speech battles in modern Indian history. Hey governments, keep doing what you're doing and trying to get people to not watch this stuff. You're doing a bang-up job. Cell block. In 2006, a single interview inside a prison cell terrified the Indonesian government so badly that they tried to erase the footage. Filmmaker Leonard Rattel Helmrich was famous for capturing raw, intimate stories across Indonesia that few outsiders could ever reach. But when he arrived at the Jakarta International Film Festival to premiere his new documentary, Promised Paradise, government censors suddenly stepped in. The movie was entirely shut down. Now, the issue wasn't graphic violence or illegal footage, it was the man sitting in front of the lens. Rather than making a standard documentary about the tragic 2002 Bali incident, the film took a far more volatile angle. It followed a local street artist who set out to confront extreme groups head-on, leading him directly into a high-security prison cell.
Tapi kalau di dalam televisi ini orangnya pun orang-orangnya asli. Ya. Bahkan lebih asli, orangnya pun bisa nongol dari dalam televisi.
There, he met the convicted conspirator of the Bali attacks, Imam Samudra. Now on camera, Samudra calmly explained his beliefs, arguing that the attacks he committed were a direct form of religious duty. That single conversation was enough to send shockwaves through the government. Fearing public outrage, officials issued a swift verbal order to festival organizers that the movie could not be screened. But the secret orders wouldn't stay hidden for long. International press groups quickly exposed the mandate, forcing the head of the censorship board to admit they had blocked the film. Their defense was that the movie was simply too provocative. With the trauma of the Bali attacks still fresh, they feared that letting his dangerous ideology on a cinema screen could reignite violence across the country. While audiences around the world watched Promised Paradise at international festivals, the very people it was made for were legally blocked from ever seeing a single frame. Pirate and circulate. To stop a movie from reaching the public, India's censor board claimed it was far too dangerous for citizens to see, but the director had other plans. It all started in early 2002, right after the Godhra train burning triggered a massive wave of anti-Muslim violence across Gujarat. Official records reported over 1,000 dead, while thousands more lost their homes. Amidst the chaos and heavy political tension, independent filmmaker Rakesh Sharma picked up a camera. He spent months recording what was actually happening on the ground. But he didn't only interview survivors hiding in relief camps, he also interviewed the perpetrators. On camera, people openly explained their hatred and attempted to justify the violence. By the time Sharma finished editing, he had created a 3.5-hour documentary titled Final Solution. The film was already winning major international awards across Europe when Sharma brought it back home to India in mid-2004. The Central Board of Film Certification immediately slammed the brakes on it. The censor board denied the documentary an official release certificate, claiming it was highly provocative and likely to inflame religious tensions. Instead of walking away or spending years arguing through official channels, Sharma launched a strategy he called Pirate and Circulate. He handed out free copies of the movie to students, activists, and local community leaders. He urged them to duplicate the discs and pass them along to everyone they knew. Within a few weeks, more than 10,000 pirated copies were moving hand to hand across the country. The public pressure got so intense that the censor board was forced to convene a special review committee. In October 2004, the board cleared Final Solution without requiring a single cut, completely undermining their own original ban. Just 2 years later, The same government that tried to bury the footage went on to honor the documentary with a National Film Award. Dangerous Border. Most war documentaries rely on archive footage or carefully staged reenactments to recreate dangerous events. Beyond Utopia took a completely different approach. Instead of recreating an escape from North Korea, director Madeline Gavin filmed one as it actually unfolded. She pulled this off by carefully placing cameras inside a real rescue operation. But here, a single mistake could put every person involved in danger. For decades, getting caught attempting to escape North Korea carried severe punishment. This documentary followed a rescue network risking that every single day. Rather than explaining those escapes through interviews alone, Beyond Utopia captured the act. It followed families secretly crossing borders, hiding from authorities, and risking their lives in search of freedom. At the center of that operation was Pastor Sunjun Kim, a South Korean human rights activist who runs a clandestine network that helps North Koreans escape.
다 했는데 아내를 돕기 위해 했던 그 미륵국에 했던 모든 일들 제가 여러 차례 데리고 이렇게 오게 된 계기가 됐습니다.
Because helping deserters can endanger everyone involved, every stage of the journey depends on coded messages, trusted contacts, and carefully planned routes. Despite the obvious risks involved, reaching the border was only the beginning. Because China does not recognize most North Korean escapees as refugees, anyone caught by Chinese authorities can be detained and forcibly returned to North Korea. And that means severe punishment. By documenting those journeys in real time, Beyond Utopia exposed that surveillance, fear, and isolation that shape everyday life inside North Korea. Following its 2023 release, Beyond Utopia received widespread international acclaim and won the U.S. Documentary Competition Audience Award at the Sundance Film Festival. Level 5. Saved by America. For a century, a forgotten piece of history stayed locked away in the archives. Then, a single documentary brought it to light, exposing a truth that would trigger an international scandal. When Famine premiered in 2022, it revisited one of the Soviet Union's darkest tragedies, the catastrophic hunger and poverty that swept across the Volga region between 1921 and 1923. On the surface, a historical documentary about a century-old tragedy seemed harmless enough. But through rare archival footage and eyewitness accounts, Famine exposed how the country actually survived it. One of the film's central stories focused on the massive forgotten international relief effort led by the American Relief Administration. The documentary proved that it was foreign aid, funded largely by the United States, that fed millions of starving Soviet citizens. Only this prevented an even greater catastrophe. But in modern Russia, that single historical truth was a kick in the gut and a major political threat. The film hit screens in 2022, right as Russia's war in Ukraine began. At the time, the Kremlin was aggressively pushing a narrative of complete national self-reliance and hostility toward the West. A movie showing that Soviet citizens owed their lives to American compassion completely shattered that narrative. At first, the pushback was subtle. Public screenings were suddenly canceled due to mysterious technical problems. But as theaters continued to fill up, the government dropped the pretense. On November 14, 2022, Russia's Ministry of Culture officially revoked the documentary's distribution license. Overnight, the movie was banned nationwide under the claim that it was socially harmful. But despite the government ban, Famine didn't disappear. Copies quickly flooded the internet, allowing audiences to watch the forbidden film online. Domestic release. When the uncut story of Jaswant Singh Kalra was dropped on Z5, government officials gave the platform two choices: delete the film or face severe national security charges. Punjab 95 was a biographical drama exposing the darkest chapters of human rights activist Jaswant Singh Kalra's life. Kalra uncovered over 25,000 illegal cremations and extrajudicial killings carried out by police during Punjab's insurgency years. Now, sadly, his investigation also made him a walking target. On September 6, 1995, Kalra was abducted from right outside his home in Amritsar and lost his life to police forces. His biography triggered a government panic so massive that they desperately tried to wipe it from all streaming apps worldwide. First, they censored the name. The film was originally titled Galugara, the Punjabi word for dinosaur. However, the Central Board of Film Certification forced them to change it to Punjab 95. So the government slapped the project with over 120 demanded cuts. Their goal was to scrub out the police involvement, soften the depiction of Sikh youth, and erase every direct reference to the secret mass graves. Finally, they stripped the title a second time, renaming it Satluj and officially banning it from every movie theater in the country.
I want to understand, and you've said this right at the top, that Satluj the movie is purely incidental to this conversation.
Absolutely.
But I want your view on the ban on the release of the movie. It was released about 48 hours, after which there was a ban.
Now, following this, the filmmakers decided to take a massive gamble. They bypassed theater censors entirely and dropped the uncut movie directly onto Z5 on July 3, 2026. Unfortunately, this lasted less than 48 hours. The government immediately invoked Section 69A of the IT Act, citing national security concerns to force an immediate takedown. Satluj disappeared from Indian catalogs and then, a few days later, from international servers as well. The takedown, like the others, only ignited a massive underground movement.
Screenings of the film are continuing at Gurdwaras. Pirated versions are being watched by people across the state.
Within days, local Sikh groups and villagers across Punjab were passing around offline copies. Temple compounds and village halls turned into makeshift cinemas overnight. Most people who wanted to watch it were still able to get access to it. The authorities turned watching the film into a living protest. Nerve agent. In broad daylight inside Kuala Lumpur International Airport, two young women walk up to Kim Jong-nam, the estranged half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. They wiped a chemical across his face, and then they're gone. 20 minutes later, he's dead.
They allegedly smeared VX chemical onto his face, and then she looked into the CCTV camera as if, yeah, I just did that, so what?
Forensic teams quickly identified the substance as VX nerve agent, one of the deadliest chemical weapons in the world. Security cameras also captured the suspects quickly, an Indonesian national and a Vietnamese national. It seemed like an open and shut case. But just as police prepared to lock them away, the suspects gave a defense that completely derailed the investigation. During interrogation, the women admitted to touching Kim Jong-nam but claimed they believed they were taking part in a hidden camera prank show. They claimed that in the weeks leading up to the assassination, a group of men had paid them to smear harmless liquids like baby oil on random strangers at the airport. Unknown to the women, their handlers swapped the harmless liquid for VX nerve agent on the day of the attack. So they were basically used as delivery systems to commit the crime. As local authorities focused on the two women, the male handlers who organized the operation safely fled the country. While the actual organizers disappeared, the two women were left behind to face the death penalty. Well, this contradiction became the main focus of Ryan White's 2020 documentary, Assassins.
This was a political assassination, more than just the two girls being involved.
There were 8 North Korean suspects. They left the country immediately after Kim Jong-nam's attack.
There is no evidence of political plot.
The film argued that instead of being cold-blooded criminals, the women were disposable participants manipulated by North Korean intelligence operatives. When Ryan White finished Assassins, major streaming platforms panicked and mainstream networks dropped the documentary. This created a silent ban that almost prevented the truth about North Korea's darkest airport hit from ever reaching the public. The legal battle ended unexpectedly in March 2019 when Malaysian prosecutors dropped the charges against their national, allowing her to return home. Shortly after, the Vietnamese national pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and was also released. Level 6. 2 decades. During the Cold War, the British government told citizens that surviving an atomic blast was simple. All they had to do was stock up on canned food and hide under a wooden table. But then, a 47-minute film surfaced proving that the entire plan was a deadly lie. In 1965, the BBC hired director Peter Watkins to create a public information-style drama about Cold War readiness. Official state manuals had initially claimed that with basic civil defense, Britain could withstand a nuclear exchange. All it required were simple things like propping up wooden doors, hoarding canned goods, and building household shelters. Watkins decided to test that premise. He shot The War Game in black and white across Kent using non-professional actors and newsreel camera techniques.
9:16 a.m. A single megaton nuclear missile overshoots Manston Airfield in Kent and airbursts 6 miles from this position.
Instead of heroic military strategy, the film focused entirely on ordinary civilians. It methodically showed what happens when a single nuclear weapon hits. The instant firestorms, blinding radiation, overwhelmed medical stations, food shortages, and authorities shooting citizens to control post-blast riots. When senior BBC executives and government officials screened the finished cut, panic set in. The film exposed state civil defense plans as completely delusional. Even worse, it directly threatened public support for Britain's nuclear deterrence policy.
12 seconds later, the shock front arrives.
Just days before its scheduled TV premiere on October 6, 1965, the BBC pulled the broadcast entirely. Publicly, they claimed the film was too horrifying for the medium of broadcasting. Privately, government pressure ensured millions of British homes were blocked from seeing it. Watkins was furious, viewing the decision as outright state censorship. But pulling it from TV had an unintended effect. It turned The War Game into an international sensation. The film received a limited cinema release and was submitted to international film festivals. In 1967, it achieved a strange milestone in cinema history by winning the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, despite not having aired in its home country. For nearly 20 years, the BBC kept the tape hidden in its vaults while the film toured global cinemas and university campuses. It wasn't until July 31st, 1985, almost 2 decades after it was made, that the BBC finally allowed British television viewers to watch the movie they had paid for. Hiroshima's camera. Everyone remembers the iconic image of mushroom clouds hanging over Hiroshima. What almost nobody remembers is what American military cameras recorded after that smoke cleared. In the days following the end of the war in August 1945, the US military dispatched camera crews into Hiroshima and Nagasaki to document the destruction. At the same time, Japanese film crews were walking those same ruined streets. Their mission was to capture the nightmare from their own perspective. Together, they filmed crowded hospital wards, civilians with catastrophic burns, terrified young people, and entire cities flattened into ash. The footage was deeply disturbing. American cameraman Daniel McGovern and his crew ultimately shot nearly 90,000 feet of film showing the after effects of the atomic blast. Meanwhile, Japanese crews documented survivors, but eventually US occupation forces stepped in, ordering them to stop and confiscated every single reel. Shortly after, the United States classified its own completed 3-hour documentary as something top secret, locking both American and Japanese archives away.
The American army showed up 3 weeks later, after our surrender. The US feared that the secret of the bomb might be revealed to other countries, such as the Soviet Union, so it seized the film.
But that cover-up didn't stop the cameras. As news of mysterious radiation sickness began leaking to the press, US officials publicly dismissed the reports. They loudly denied all claims that civilians were dying from toxic exposure. Journalists who dared to report on radiation faced heavy pushbacks, while government propaganda focused entirely on their military triumph. As a result, the world was left with one iconic image: the mushroom cloud. But the human suffering beneath it was quietly erased. Meanwhile, away from the public, survivors lived with life-altering burns and chronic illnesses completely unseen by the outside world. But the truth could never stay buried forever. Fearing the military would destroy the film, cameraman Daniel McGovern secretly preserved duplicate copies of key footage. Decades later, as those files were slowly declassified, filmmakers helped bring the confiscated Japanese reels back into the light, exposing the uncomfortable truth about human history. Level 7. Nobel Peace Laureate. For decades, Dr. Denis Mukwege saved thousands of brutalized women. But a 2015 documentary would soon expose that he was saving them from his own fellow citizens. Mukwege operated out of a Panzi hospital in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, rebuilding the bodies of women who had survived unimaginable acts of violence. To the outside world, he was a miracle worker operating on the front lines of human suffering. But Mukwege knew surgery alone couldn't fix the crisis, so he began publicly accusing political leaders of ignoring the perpetrators. That public defiance naturally triggered a deadly response that would almost cost him his life. In 2012, masked men stormed Mukwege's home for a brutal assassination attempt. Now, fortunately, he survived.
Donc quand j'arrive à ces niveaux, c'est 5 personnes directement entrées dans le véhicule, armées, tous armés. Le pauvre Joseph qui est venu de derrière, là le monsieur s'est tourné et il a tiré sur Joseph.
But instead of retreating into the shadows, he opened his hospital doors to Belgian filmmaker Thierry Michel to film the 2015 documentary, The Man Who Mends Women. The documentary was supposed to capture his surgical work. However, as survivors began speaking on camera, the film took a dark turn. The movie was no longer covering just the graphic reality of the operating room. The survivors were also naming names on camera. That terrified state officials. The documentary proved that the atrocities weren't just being committed by rogue rebel militias deep in the jungle. Survivors were pointing directly at soldiers in the country's national army.
Kulikuwa basoda 5 walikuwa wananichunga. Bale basoda bote balinikuta. Na mimi wote nishakuwa kunilala na nikakuwa deforme. Hii kichwa ikakuwa ya hivi, mikono hivi. Niteswaka mimi hata.
While the international community praised the film's bravery, state officials inside Congo panicked. When the government realized they couldn't disprove the footage, they resorted to a bizarre excuse to put an end to the film once and for all. On September 2nd, 2015, the Congolese government banned the documentary nationwide. Desperate to deflect, officials claimed the Swahili subtitles were badly translated. They accused the director of trying to ruin the army's honor. However, in 2018, Dr. Denis Mukwege was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work combating violence in war zones.
Dans les zones de conflit, les batailles se passent sur le corps des femmes. Leur corps blessé avait besoin d'être guéri, consolé et restauré. Nous avons l'espoir pour l'avenir de la République démocratique du Congo.
The exact documentary that the Congolese government had branded as harmful propaganda became the historical record of a Nobel laureate. Suddenly, there was no way they could ever truly censor it. Dark Camp. Night and Fog was considered one of the greatest documentaries ever made, but the moment it was released, 2 separate countries rushed to ban it. Released in 1956, Night and Fog combined horrifying archival footage from Nazi concentration camps with quiet color footage of those same camps a decade later. Director Alain Resnais and writer Jean Carroll, a camp survivor, wanted to show how easily ordinary places could become sites of unimaginable mass tragedy. It was only 30 minutes long, but the images were powerful enough to spark an international political scandal.
Celui du temps d'avant peut bien apparaître au loin, pas si loin. Pour le déporter, c'était une image. Limité par les miradors, d'où les soldats surveillaient la bonne tenue du camp, visaient sans fin les déporter, les tuaient à l'occasion par désœuvrement.
The controversy started when the film acknowledged that the Nazis didn't work alone. They had help. While assembling archival photos, Resnais included a single photograph taken at a French transit camp. In the frame, sitting quietly in a guard tower, was a French police officer. That officer supervised the deportation of families to the camps. That clearly set the direction of the documentary, exposing France's own active collaboration in the Holocaust.
Les déportés regardent sans comprendre. Sont-ils délivrés? La vie quotidienne va-t-elle les reconnaître? Je ne suis pas responsable, dit le capot. Je ne suis pas responsable, dit l'officier. Je ne suis pas responsable. Alors, qui est responsable?
This revelation sent the French government into a panic immediately. They demanded the image be removed, threatening to ban the entire documentary nationwide if it wasn't. To save his film, Resnais was forced into an unusual compromise. Painters were forced to manually draw a fake wooden beam onto the film reel, hiding the French officer's hat. But France wasn't the only government trying to silence the film. When Night and Fog was selected to represent France at the 1956 Cannes Film Festival, West German diplomats panicked too. They argued that showing the brutal reality of the camps at an elite international festival would destroy fragile post-war alliances, not to mention inflaming anti-German sentiment. Under intense political pressure, festival directors gave in and pulled the documentary from the official competition. However, the attempt to hide the movie backfired completely. News of the censorship leaked, kickstarting massive public outrage across Europe. The outcry was so intense that Cannes was forced to compromise, screening Night and Fog out of competition to packed audiences.
Je ne pense pas d'ailleurs que le film soit une véritable énigme. Je veux dire que chaque spectateur pourra trouver sa solution. Je crois que c'est simplement un souci de réalisme et peut-être même de lucidité. Je me considère comme un réalisateur et je prends la responsabilité qui est celle du réalisateur.
The scandal turned the 30-minute film into a global phenomenon. Despite attempts to censor it, Night and Fog still managed to convey its message to the public. Black screen. Hours before the documentary India's Daughter was set to air nationwide, the police secured a secret court order to pull it off the airwaves. Directed by Leslie Udwin, the film recounted a horrific 2012 gang crime committed on medical student Jyoti Singh on a moving Delhi bus. The crime had previously brought tens of thousands of angry protesters into the streets demanding a legal overhaul. This documentary hoped to explore the systemic behind the violence.
What is the point of not staring truth in the face and finding out why these men do what they do? We had better know if we want to change them, hadn't we? Every single statement of his lives in the context of enlightened views around it.
What officials didn't anticipate was that the most explosive footage in the film wouldn't come from the crime scene. While researching the film, Udwin secured access to Tihar jail to interview Mukesh Singh, one of the men convicted and sentenced to death for the assault. Sitting calmly before the camera, Singh offered zero remorse, repeatedly. Instead, he explicitly blamed the victim for being out late, claiming that the woman was responsible for the crime committed. When the defense attorneys echoed those same victim-blaming sentiments on tape, excerpts leaked to the press. The country was stunned.
मतलब है जब उसका हो रहा हो उसे लड़ाई झगड़ा नहीं करना चाहिए चुपचाप मतलब उसका रेप हो जाना अगर वो हाथ पैर नहीं चलाती तो गलत काम करके उसे करके उतार देते ना कि उसे मारते लड़के को ही मारते हो.
The government tried to ban the documentary, claiming it was intended to prevent public riots. However, the censorship strategy backfired immediately. Terrified that the broadcast would damage the nation's global reputation, Indian authorities rushed to court to block the telecast. YouTube was asked to scrub every copy from the internet. When news network NDTV was forbidden from airing the film, they responded by showing a silent black screen throughout the slot. Meanwhile, the BBC retaliated by moving the UK release date forward, broadcasting the documentary to millions of international viewers days earlier than scheduled. The Indian government claimed they were acting out of respect for the country, but that narrative would soon be shattered. As politicians argued that the documentary insulted the nation, Jyoti Singh's father, Badri Singh, broke his silence. Standing beside his wife, Asha Devi, he begged the government to let the public watch the documentary. He told reporters that hiding the documentary didn't honor his daughter's memory. Instead, it protected the very mindsets that killed her. Despite the pleas, the Indian government did not lift the ban.
हैवान भी कहेंगे तो हैवान भी उसकी एक लिमिट होती होगी. ये तो पूरे शैतान है. शैतानियत को ही पार कर गए. ऐसा घिनौना कर्म ये जो समय याद आता है तो फिर आवाज में आती है नहीं निकल पाती आवाज क्या करें.
In their desperate attempt to save face on the global stage, they ended up proving the film's central thesis. In the end, India's Daughter was banned because it exposed an extremely uncomfortable truth about their society. Now, we've just witnessed major players try to suppress documentaries worldwide. But what do those people do when accidents happen on live TV? We'll find out in the most disturbing live TV accidents, Iceberg. And also, this iceberg doesn't end here, because we have an exclusive and uncensored Level 8 now available on our Patreon. Link in the description.